Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Academic Library Support and Services for the Research Community through Scientific Data Sharing, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. I'll just put a couple links in the chat for where you all can register for upcoming Choice ACRL webinars and watch previous Choice webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speaker. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions and comments into the Q&A module as they occur to you. Also, there's closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Fatos Xhafa. Fatos Xhafa, PhD in Computer Science, is full professor at the Technical University of Catalonia, Barcelona, Spain. He has held various tenured and visiting professorship positions. He was a visiting professor at the University of Surrey, UK, visiting professor at the Birkbeck College, University of London, UK, and a research associate at Drexel University, Philadelphia, USA. He was a distinguished guest professor at Hubei University of Technology, China for 3 years. And Professor Xhafa has widely published in peer-reviewed international journals, conferences/workshops, book chapters, edited books, and proceedings in the field. He has been awarded teaching and research merits by the Spanish Ministry of Science and Education, by IEEE conferences, and Best Paper Awards. His research interests include IoT and cloud-to-thing continuum computing, massive data processing and collective intelligence, optimization, security, and trustworthy computing and machine learning, among others. And with that, we are ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Professor Xhafa.
All right. Thank you, Sabrina, for the introduction and for preparing everything for this webinar. Thank you, Ashley, as well, for your help and assistance. So I received a request from actually Springer, Germany, to hold this webinar regarding the collaboration of libraries, services, and research community about the scientific data sharing, right? So that invitation obviously was very interesting to me because my background is from computer science, and I'm familiar with the scientific research and scientific data sharing, but it was a little bit more challenging, and I wanted to see how this can be done in conjunction and in collaboration with the library or the people from the libraries community, right? So I have organized the presentation of this webinar into 4 parts. First, I'll try to give you some reasons why is the scientific data sharing of importance to researchers. Then I'll list some of the challenges, both research and development challenges, but also some of the opportunities for researchers and libraries in this context. Then I'll bring to your attention some examples of open data science projects from all over the world. And at the last part, I'd like to discuss some future trends in open data, most importantly, future trends that has to do with artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and this current discussion, which also affects the open science and open data, right? So at the end, we'll have, as Sabrina said, a question and answer. So please feel free to ask your questions. To start with, let me just give you some of the reasons which why the scientific data sharing is important to researchers. So let me start by saying that scientific data sharing has been always very important for the scientific communities. However, with the fast development of internet technologies, scientific data sharing has become very important and also possible, because now we can have a collaboration through scientific platforms, and then data sharing is possible, right? So some of the reasons why is data sharing important are, for example, that a large part of the research, as you know, is empirical research, which means that it requires verifiable evidence. Obviously, to have that empirical research sustained and the claims to be verifiable and sustained, either in a quantitative or in a qualitative studies, it is important to have collection of data. So whenever someone plans to have an empirical research, one of the things in the checklist of that study should be, what collection of data shall I use for sustaining the claim, right? A second reason would be that any novel research method that claims to present an improvement beyond the state of the art needs to use data, and that data should be shared with others so that others can use exactly the same data to see if how do the new research methods stand with regard to the new state of the art, right? Additionally, as you know, any research method is never conclusive. So this is an research methods are continuously under the scrutiny. They are improved and they are analyzed and they are reviewed. So in order to find the strengths or weaknesses of research methods, is necessary to use the data set. For example, a research method could be performed well in some data set, but may perform poorly on other data sets, right? So data set become a key ingredient to evaluating the strengths and the weaknesses of the research methods. These three reasons are kind of a general setting reasons. However, in the context of more specific research, such as artificial intelligence or machine learning, data sets are of a paramount importance. As you know, in artificial intelligence and machine learning, data sets are key to training and to testing these methods. So without data sets, artificial intelligence of machine learning methods would be impossible to to be trained and tested and to work in practice, right? In some cases, we would like not only to see what are common patterns in the data, but we also like to see hidden patterns from the data, right? So in that case, extracting models from the data set is very useful because it tries to uncover even patterns that are not directly seen from the data, right? And to conclude with this, I mean, there are many reasons, but with these reasons, as you know, research is an incremental process. So we have research studies that make a snapshot now, let's say, of a phenomena, but we have research studies that make give a perspective on the short term, mid-term, or on the long run, right? And in each phase of this incremental research, which is actually a never-ending process, we need data sets to support. So in the same way that the research methods, research technology supporting the research evolves, in the same way also the data sets and data and methodologies for collecting data, preparing data, etc., evolve over time, right? So there are plenty of reasons of why the scientific data sharing has become of such of importance to researchers nowadays, right? So now, obviously, all these reasons stand from the perspective of the scientific data sharing, right? So now our main point here is what libraries can do and how can libraries define their role in this scientific data sharing, right? So to that, um, uh, before I enter into that, let me also mention that whenever we talk to scientific data sharing, actually we understand open data, or we understand open science, right? So as you know, open science and open data are perfectly orchestrated, because whenever we talk about open science, there is and should be open data, and whenever there is open data, that should enable the open science, right? So there is a commonly understood and accepted classification or taxonomy of open science into different branches, from open access, open data, open reproducible research, open science, and etc. And as you see, I have marked here one of the branches, actually the second is actually the open data. So that's absolutely fundamental to make the open science, right? And one of the main reasons, besides the reason that I said, is that when you make the data open, that enables others, to make to use the same data set, either with the same method or with different methods, and to sustain the reproducible research, right? So if you look at that classification of the open data in the right branches, then you will see, among others, the open big data, which means that very large data sets at the scale of the internet can be nowadays are available for use by scientific community. We need to agree what we understand by an open data definition. Actually, later on in this presentation, I'll talk about the FAIR principles that guide that open data definitions. And of course, as you know, open data journals, nowadays journals from Springer, Elsevier, and major publishing companies do support open data linked to the research journals, right? And not less important, nowadays we'll see more and more initiatives related to open data government, open government data, right? So and this is really an excellent news that many governments around the world and also public institutions are contributing. So the open science is actually a paradigm shift in scientific research. In what sense? In the sense that the research understood as a long-term collaborative process in different phases, whenever it is done under the open science paradigm, it means that every stage of that research is supported by the open science paradigm, right? So the current, as I'll explain a little bit later, cloud ecosystem, the digital cloud ecosystem makes possible that this open science can be fully implemented in practice. So now, once we have seen some of the reasons that why the scientific data sharing is important to scientific community and to research overall, let me discuss some of the challenges and also the opportunities for both researchers and the libraries in this field, right? So as I said earlier, the open data and open research have undergone a very fast transition due to this digital cloud ecosystem. So in a very few years, we are seeing how the digital cloud ecosystem is embracing everything. Therefore, the open research and open data are not an exception, right? And on the contrary, actually, the digital cloud ecosystem is an active, very great news for the open research and the open data set, because it can support the open science at any stage of the research, right? So some of the researches that I would list here is that the very first one is to make the data open. First, we know that not everybody can collect data. What does that mean? Means that collecting data is not a straightforward process. It requires people, it requires technology, it requires money, and it requires time. So some institutions have more opportunities or possibilities than others, right? So by making the data open, what we actually do is to give the possibility to others that are not able to collect the data to use that data for their own research, right? So the key challenge here is how to make the data open to the research community. One could think that open data is as simple as posting a data set in a web page, but actually there are many challenges related to the open data. So it's not that straightforward. When we talk about open data, as I'll discuss a little bit later, we talk about open data that comply with a number of quality standards. And therefore, what we really need as open data is open data that is useful for the research community at large, right? But the very first point is how to make that data open and available to the whole community. So how can libraries do? I believe that this is an opportunity for the libraries, which really can help, because libraries have always been a place to find information, as we know. So libraries have a lifetime of centuries, and they as we know, they were the first place where to find any information. Whenever I would like to, for example, find an article or a book, the first thing I do is I go to my library digital version of the library of my university, and I check if I can access that resource straight away, right? So in the same way that libraries have been able to be a place of information over centuries, they can also extend their role to include as part of that information also the open data collections. But of course, it's not as easy as to have a collections of books or a collections of journals, even physical or digital versions, because the transition from the physical versions, let's say, of collection of books series, it has been easy to transit to the digital version. But now, if we have to have the open data collections, we first need to define that concept of the open data collections, and there are plenty of issues behind that. So there are security issues, there are privacy issues, and most importantly, they are authenticity data issues, because within a large data collection, there could easily be introduced fake data, which would obviously undermine the research activity. And of course, there should be compliance with ethical responsibilities of data sharing, inclusiveness issues, gender issues, etc. Right? So there are issues, there are concerns, of course, but I believe that there is an opportunity for libraries to help the research community through extending their collections of information to open data collections. The second, and perhaps from a technical perspective, the most important challenge is implementing the FAIR principles. So the FAIR stands from findability, accessibility, interoperability, reuse of digital assets, right? So the research community has come to the understanding that any open data obviously is useful when it is implemented to serve at the long run. And for an open data to serve at the long run, it should implement the FAIR principles. Now, from a technical perspective, this is possible because the cloud digital ecosystem makes possible to implement findability, so you can search and find the open data sets. It makes possible accessibility under different access roles. It makes possible interoperability, though, as I'll discuss a little bit later, this interoperability issue is perhaps one of the weakest points nowadays, and the reuse of the open data sets and the digital assets in general, right? So the question is, what can libraries can help? How can libraries help here, or what opportunity can we identify here for the libraries? Well, as I said before, libraries has a huge experience in organizing physical and digital collections. So actually, what we need is the experience from the libraries and translate this experience to create or prepare organizational procedures. Sorry for the typo. I meant organizational procedures for the open data collections. So instead of trying to to guess how we should organize the open data collection, perhaps we can knock at the door of the library, the people, at the libraries, and ask their experience on the organization of physical and digital collections, and then apply those procedures to perhaps redefine in some way to the open data collection, right? As you can see, here is a picture on the right. So actually, FAIR, implementing the FAIR principle is not just one shot procedure. So it's actually is a cycle. So we have a never-ending cycle somehow, because, as I said, data open are useful when they can serve at the long run. So we sense the data, we collect the data. We have to prepare and curate the data. We may enrich the data later, and we share the data, right? And then this cycle is continuously implemented, because we sense data from the e-health, data from the industry, data from the environment, et cetera, right? And this yields to the creation of these open data collections, right? The third challenge is actually, and this is again very critical, is to ensure the data quality dimension. So collecting data nowadays, it's not difficult. You can have a number of sensors out there, or you can have a number of cameras, and then it's easy to collect the data. Is that data rich? It depends. Does that data complies with quality standards? Not necessarily. So defining the data as a new oil, not only for the businesses, but also for the research community at large, data is useful if it has quality. So, and there are at least 5 dimensions that define if the data really has quality or not. So that is a timeliness, completeness, so we don't have gaps into the data, validity, so the data has no errors, consistency, which means that the data patterns or the data collections is done continuously using same procedures, no changes in the midst of the data collections or data preparation, etc. And of course, the accuracy, right? So this is perhaps one of the most difficult things. Um, this can be done, of course, mostly by the technical expertise of the research community. Um, I don't think that libraries are, do have the expertise to ensure the data quality dimensions, because the completeness, validity, consistency, accuracy are more technical. But libraries have a huge experience in ensuring the quality standards of digital collections, what is otherwise known as data curation. So if you go to a library, they can define, for example, this is a high quality collections of books or of journals because it has been curated. So means that you don't see gaps. You see that the whole series of the books or of the journals is complete, and there are annotated information on that book series or collections of documents, etc. Right. So this data curation expertise, I believe, is very interesting and very also helpful for the research community, and the collaboration between both the research community and the libraries can benefit in making to ensure the data quality dimension, right? So how can this be done? Obviously, we need to promote the multidisciplinary and, of course, cross-disciplinary teams with librarians and researchers and developers to see how this data curation expertise from the collections in the libraries can be translated into the research community, right? Um, we do have a weak point here, and actually is that there is a lot of time behind all these procedures. And unfortunately, universities or institutions in general do not recognize enough the credits to researchers for openly sharing their data and working as data curators, right? So we really need to insist and promote that this dedication from both researchers and the libraries in data sharing and data curation, right? As a fourth challenge, I would like to mention that open data management is really costly. It is complex. Implementing the FAIR principles requires expertise. It requires technological platforms, continuous supports, and money. So it cannot be done alone. It requires efforts from universities, research institutions, research projects, scientific research community at large, right? So I have identified here some opportunities where the libraries can help in this context, and to alleviate a little bit the burden of this complex open data management. First, I think libraries are not expected to be a data placeholder. So having an open big data, it's not easy. And so libraries are usually large technological platforms, but they are not expected to be a data placeholder, right? So, but they can promote the open data projects. For example, you may wonder that actually there are some networks today called the data curation networks, and you can have a look at that link if you would be interested in that, where actually is promoted this data curation effort, right? So I believe libraries can participate in data curation networks and can give their experience, right? Of course, they can train data curators. They can enable and promote best data curation practices, promote open data culture, organize open data events, etc. Right? So the more we work with the community in this direction, the better will be for the open data projects overall, right? So having said this, let me bring to your attention some open data projects in practice. So I have ticked here with a blue circle only those items that correspond to the open data projects. I think we can have this classification: open data projects which are linked to research projects, either past or ongoing, and or we can have a generic open data, right, which are not related to a concrete research project, but they are there and can be used by different research projects, right? So as you see, um, research is fundamentally based, on this um, openness concept, right? Like dissemination plans, data management plan, which have to be in place before we start any, research project, right? So we have to have a decision to disseminate and share, and we have to have plans of depositing the research data and give access and promote the free of charge use. Of course, in some cases, it's natural that the access could be restricted, especially because of the delicate nature or the restricted nature of the data. But generally, we should promote this culture of the use free of charge of the data, right? Some examples in place, for example, are open data from Spanish government and also from the City Hall of Barcelona, from European Union, United States, Canada, Australia. So most Western countries do have the open data initiatives, and that's actually an excellent news because scientific research community can benefit from those open data, which are completely managed and maintained by the governments, but they can be used freely by the research communities. And of course, there are many open data by private entities as well, right? Now, if you remember, in the FAIR principles, there was one point that was the interoperability, right? So findability, accessibility, interoperability, reuse and of digital assets and open data, right? So findability is overall well implemented, and accessibility as well, and reuse as well. But interoperability is still a weak point in open data, because uh, different data sets which are maintained by different governmental bodies, they are interoperable at the local scale, but they are not interoperable at the global scale, right? So this would be perhaps one of the next challenges to be addressed by the open data at large scale, right? So we can see open data from different parts of the world that could be, integrated and interoperable, and that, of course, would give the research community much more opportunities to use for their scientific research, right? Now, how are actually libraries participating, or can the libraries make the liaison in this need for implementing interoperability? I think there is needed more connection and collaboration between researchers, librarians, private and public institutions. So in this context, libraries which know how to interoperate within one country, for example, within United States, through American Library Association, should translate their experience also to different governmental bodies as regards the management of the open data, right? So I'm not, if you are interested, you get to get examples from open data of the Spanish government in datos.gov.es, examples from open data of Barcelona City. So I would invite you to have a look at the open data BCN for Barcelona, which has about more than 600 data sets, and they are really rich and interesting for different kinds of research studies. Of course, European Union is a champion in terms of promoting the open data So you can find lots of examples from both public and private bodies. So now the point is to make that available and interoperable at larger scale, right? So before I'm coming to the last part of this webinar, and I'd like to discuss some of the future trends in the data sharing and how these can affect the open data and how libraries can be helpful and collaborate with the research community for the open data in this context, right? So one interesting trend in data sharing is that actually sharing and openness are going beyond the specialized communities. So in the recent past, we used to see how open data was used principally by researchers, right? But now we see that these open data sets are also open to citizens at large for reasons of transparency, accessibility, but also for participation and engagement, right? So, for example, in United Kingdom, the Metropolitan Police in London has opened as a data set, an open data set, which called Open Crime Data and also Open Maps, which shows the citizens to be informed of the nature of the crimes in the area where they live, right? So this participation and engagement of the citizens gives yet another reason to the public and private institutions to invest more on the open data as a source for not only supporting the research, but also for the citizenship participation, right? Now, one of the criteria that I mentioned in before is actually the data quality, which is really critical. Now, each time more we see the definition of a concept which is called the data health or the data observability. So we really need to ensure that the data is healthy in a sense that it is accurate, it is reliable. Otherwise, if we allow in the data set to enter data which is either incomplete, inaccurate, or unreliable, then that would get a catastrophic impact and undermine the research of scientific community, right? So data health as a concept requires to be taken very seriously to ensure the quality of the data in the long run, right? So and for this, I think the libraries can be helpful to give their experience of how they ensure that the collections of the information or books, journals, etc., was really healthy along many years or even centuries. And another trend is to consider, because now we see each time more data, we also have to consider and more seriously analyze the risk for the open data. And one of these risks is defined as a data downtime, so that which is the period of time when data is incomplete, erroneous, having gaps inside, or is inaccurate, right? So there is one statistics from Gartner. We need not to take it as literally, because need not to be that much. Gartner is saying that by 2025, 80% of organizations seeking to scale digital businesses may fail because they didn't take a modern approach to data and analytics governance, right? So even I mean, 80%, I'm not sure if it has any statistical significance, but anyway, it's an alerting that actually, indeed, digital businesses could fail if they didn't take a modern approach to data governance, right? So, which means that scientific community has, even it's not part of, let's say, not from a perspective of a business, but from a perspective of the research, is important to take into account that a modern approach to data openness is really very important, right? Yes, yet another direction of these open trends, the trends for the open data is actually to give more incentivation for the open data. incentivization could be money related or could be effort related, right? So if we consider monetization, that's actually not the direction of the openness, because means that um, the access to the data will not be completely open, might be selective or might be by paying, etc. Right? But still, in some critical areas which are not covered by open data, forms of monetization, which not necessarily means money, would be useful to generate and manage new data sets. Right? What I would like to stress here is the crediting, which means to give credit to researchers and curators and all communities that contribute to implementing the open data, right? So the I've posted here, well, I'm showing here a graph from an article from Nature Water recently, which actually, if you see the crossed links here, which means that the researchers actually do not receive enough credit for the effort they dedicate to the open data. And actually, it has to be this credit has to be recognized. I'm a university professor, and I recognize that as a university professor, I have never received any, acknowledgement about the time that I have dedicated to either to working or collaborating with the open data in general, right? So, and this has to change because we need to involve more people, and this involving more people requires more effort and more time. Therefore, that should have to be recognized. And lastly, one of the hype, perhaps, and trends now is the Chat GPT artificial intelligence, right? As you know, there is a large discussion, not only in the scientific community, but also in the society at large about the impact of the artificial intelligence and Chat GPT everywhere, in every field of our lives. So, and of course, open data are not an exception of that. So there are two directions or two relations between artificial intelligence and open data. The first is that the ChatGPT and other similar tools use actually open data. As you know, ChatGPT needs data to train its model, right? So open data actually has become a key to the performance of the Chat GPT. So now we do not have any we do not have any real information how these open data sets are being used by the Chat GPT, right? So there are obviously legal issues, and Chat GPT and similar tools should comply with requirements on transparency and accountability. So what data have they used to train the algorithms, right? The other side is that ChatGPT, which, as you know, is part of the generative artificial intelligence, can be used to generate data sets. I have to say that to my knowledge, and as far as I have read, this data generation is not the strong point of ChatGPT right now. So nevertheless, in some cases, people are reporting reasonable performance when it comes to the data generation, right? Now, the weakest point here is that the open data set, the data sets generated by ChatGPT could easily contain fake data. They are actually realistic data, but in the sense that they are realistically generated, but inside they can have some patterns or some data which could easily support some wrong hypothesis on the scientific hypothesis, right? So and there has now is a trend on the scientific community that has started to show how some data sets generated by Chat GPT are actually supporting wrong or fake scientific hypotheses, right? So we have to be very concerned about the research integrity whenever that research is based on ChatGPT data. So the question is the artificial intelligence or ChatGPT a game changer for the open data? Right now it is not, but most likely it will be sometime soon, because or not only ChatGPT, but all large model generations are progressing at a very fast pace. Therefore, we'll see how this can be used also for generating data sets, right? There are lots of concerns, as I said, about security, data leakage, confidentiality, liability, property, compliance, etc. So, and of course, whenever there are concerns, there are needs, and there are also needs for regulations. And as you know, very recently, European Union has released the Artificial Intelligence Act, which actually defines the levels of risk associated with artificial intelligence. And of course, we can take at a smaller scale, but these kinds of risk also apply to the data sets and to the open data, right? So now, whenever, let's say we want to release an open data set using artificial intelligence algorithms, we have to look at this pyramid, and we have to see and which of these levels of risk we are, so that we can mitigate those risks, right? So to conclude here, as you know, we are in the area of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and similar tools that are shaping everything, not only scientifically, but also in the society at large. So what the libraries role can be here, I think the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular will propel yet another shift to libraries. So the libraries had a digital shift from the physical collections to digital collections. Now they are prompted to have a shift towards the knowledge creation and dissemination centers. So, and as part of this knowledge creation, libraries also can contribute to the open data creation and also procedural understanding of management of the open data, right? So, of course, there are plenty of concerns in this context, but I think that libraries should find opportunities to work with different communities and to contribute to the open data, right? So absolutely, the implementing a fair artificial intelligence procedures, fair, accountable, inclusive, and respectful artificial intelligence is of paramount importance to the open science and to the open data center, right? So if you are interested in reading more on this and similar topics, I'd like to invite you to look at these lecture notes in data engineering and communication technologies, which is published by Springer. We have from time to time also, we publish authored books, we publish edited volumes, and we publish conference proceedings. So, and as part of this, you also will find articles which are relating to the open data in this context, right? So I'd like to thank Dr. Ditzinger from the Springer Heidelberg in Germany for this opportunity, and also the Springer team, Tatiana, Lisa, and of course the Sabrina and Ashley from the Choice and Association of College and Research Libraries for their help in preparing this webinar. So I think I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And now, Sabrina, your turn, please.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Xhafa. Yeah, like you said, we have some time for some questions. So I'll just encourage everyone, if you haven't put in a question yet, feel free to enter that into the Q&A box. And before that, I'll just launch a quick poll for everyone that you can fill out as well. Okay, so we do have a few questions already. So this first one came in, I think, early on in your presentation, which is, what exactly What is exactly meant by data sets? Is it a collection of data with common characteristics or linked together?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's an interesting question. Whenever we talk about data set, it is understood that that data set um, reflects a phenomenon that we are interested to study, right? So if we'd like to have, let's say, a data set about the noise in the city, obviously that data set means that will be useful to study that phenomenon, which means that we'll have sensors in the city in that area, and through those sensors we can collect the data, and that data can be useful to study the phenomenon, right? Now, of course, that data has to be once the data. So, if you don't mind, I could go back to that cycle in implementing the FAIR. Just give me a moment, please, because I'm using this back. So if you, in this FAIR implementation, oh, sorry. Yeah, oops. So here. So if you see here, we have a data cycle, right? So we sense the data, we collect the data, and then once we collect the data, that data is not useful straightforward. So for that data set to become useful for supporting the research study of the phenomenon, we need to give a structure to that data. We need to curate the data. Curation is, a general term, which means that data must be structured. Data must be interrelated. Data, must be curated from possible errors during the data collection, etc. Right. So to come to your point, data sets are those that are collected through a process, a data collection process. It could be through sensors, it could be through cameras, it could be through questionnaires, or it could be through could be fetched from the web, etc. Whatever the way it is, once we have the data, that data has to be structured and has to be curated before it is used, right? In some cases, there is also associated this concept of data enrichment, which is there is a concept of semantic data enrichment, which means that we complement the data with other data so that it can be more helpful in the research study, right? For example, if we are getting the data about the noise in the area of the city, we can enrich that data with geo localization of the data, or with timestamps, etc., etc. Right? So yes, data sets need to have this processing and curation, and also interlinking between as part of that data set.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question here that just came in. Uh, it's why is interoperability still a challenge when there are ways of making data global?
Yeah, that's absolutely a brilliant question, and I'm happy that you have made that point. So, the first challenge, I would say, so there are two different challenges, I think, here. One first challenge is technical, and the other one is more, let's say, political. So the technical challenge is the scale. So because at the European Union, for example, different governments have their open data sets. So Spain, or within Spain, different municipalities like Barcelona have their own data sets. However, they are not interoperable. So the technical challenge is the scale. So we would like to move to the scale of European Union, or to the scale of dozens of countries. The fact that we have to manage interoperability while every collection is managed not globally but locally. So and that makes the interoperability very difficult, because the city hall of Barcelona will not give permission to other actors to host their data. So the data life cycle is defined in Barcelona, but that data should be able to be integrated with others, and others may have a different data cycle definition, right? So these technicalities are not, unsolvable. They can be solved, and I guess we can move from the country to a regional or a few countries, and then we move to European Union and to a larger scale. So that's possible with the cloud digital ecosystem. What I see more difficult here is the political aspect, because behind the data, in many cases, there is data which institutions or governmental bodies would not like to give access to others. So they can give access in using it, but not in manipulating it or in defining procedures that they should comply, right? Nevertheless, we are moving from a state where open data sets were absolutely disgregated to a stage where data sets become to see interoperability. So I believe in the near future, interoperability will be each time more possible at the larger scale.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more. And there's an interesting comment here from sort of the librarian perspective. Um, it says, while it is nice to talk about sharing data, don't forget the metadata to connect all of these data sets together is equally important. You need to think about PIDs, ORCID, GRID, DOI, etc. if you want to get credit for sharing your data set. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of numbers that have no context.
Yes.
So,
Yes, definitely.
any thoughts about that?
Finding ways, to give credit to researchers and developers, generally speaking, about the efforts that they have dedicated to the data. So to put it simply, data has been used or has been understood so far as as an additional means to make research. But I believe it's time now to give to the open data the class of the first citizen, right? So open data has a lot of value, and as such, people that work on creating those open data sets should definitely take and credit about. It could be academical recognition. It could be, I don't know, different forms, but there should be, of course, a recognition to that.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think we have time for one more. Um, we have sort of a broad question here that says, open science is okay, but how do we achieve an environment for open data?
Well, the very first point to achieve that environment from the open data is to analyze the procedures that enable the implementation of the FAIR, right, principle, right. And let me show you the case of one of the examples of the open data that yeah. So from a methodological perspective, it has to go through as shown in this diagram. Do you see this diagram or yes?
Yes.
So so as you see, there should be a data management plan. So whenever a research group or an entity, a university, public body, private body, etc., decides to go for an open data, it has to be a data management plan, right? So it has to have criteria, criteria on how to decide the dissemination and sharing, in which way will be deposited and made possible the access to that data, right? So this is from a conceptual perspective, which of course need to be translated into a technological implementation or technical implementation. But now the very, if you look at the open data set of the city of Barcelona, so what you'll see is that there is no, it's not just putting the data sets over there. So there is a way which classifies the data according by themes. So for example, we have data sets about territory, we have about population, about city and services, about administration, about economy and businesses. And myself, for example, I have used these data sets here for to study optimization and artificial intelligence algorithms for the that use the data to monitor in real time the traffic in the city, right? So the good thing is that because there is a data plan behind, these data sets are continuously, I mean, very frequently updated, right? So there is a team behind that takes care, in structuring the data, in classifying the data, in curating the data, etc. Right? I understand that this is a huge task which small research groups cannot do, or cannot do at this scale, but public administrations can do it, of course. And I believe that if different research groups would join together and collaborate, they can also build such possibilities by using the cloud digital ecosystem.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think we're about out of time. So thank you so much to Professor Xhafa for taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session and hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thank you very much. And I take this opportunity to wish everybody, happy holidays, and I hope that we'll be in touch for future opportunities in these fields. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.